Welcome to the Clayton Tyner podcast, where I help you view current issues through the lens of the ancient wisdom of Scripture. This week, the two teenagers who filmed themselves laughing while running over and murdering a bicyclist finally had their day in court. The expectation that the reality of murdering a retired police chief may have hit them and sobered them up was quickly broken when the teens spent the court date laughing mockingly and even flipping off the family of the deceased. How does a young person's heart become this hardened? Where does this level of evil actually come from? Speaking of crime, an investigation into a COVID-era decision by Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear has brought new heat onto his gubernatorial reelection. In 2020, Beshear signed off on the early release of 1,700 inmates to alleviate the spread of COVID. However, since then, 882 of those released have been charged with new felonies, while hundreds more committed new misdemeanors. All told, around 70% have found themselves back in the system, and some of the crimes were heinous and even deadly. What does this tell us about our misguided views of human nature and justice? Earlier this year, Netflix released a docuseries following three NFL quarterbacks. Now, while he was far from the flashiest or even the most successful, Kirk Cousins made his way into the hearts of everyone who watched. This weekend, he suffered a season-ending injury, and the response once again showed that he may be the most loved player in football. What exactly is it about Captain Kirk that is so endearing, and what could it teach us today? All that and one critique of a recent interview of former Christian influencers Rhett and Link. A few years ago, Rhett and Link joined the ever-growing list of public Christian figures who have now deconstructed their faith and walked away from Christianity. I will set out to deconstruct their deconstruction and see what we can learn. All that and more on episode 37 of the Clayton Tyner podcast. We made it to episode 37. Let's go. I want to thank everyone so much for rocking with the podcast. I also want to remind you that I have created a Patreon for the podcast, patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. There is a link in the description below. I want to thank Eric McCarty, who has consistently been like my biggest supporter, always just talking to me and encouraging me. And he became the very first Patreon, and you can join him on there. The Patreon offers, in exchange for a subscription that helps me cover the cost of the podcast, exclusive content, early access to content, even a live Q&A where once a month, every month, we'll all jump into a Google Meet or something like that. That's the middle tier that you can subscribe for and just have a chance to actually interact. So it's not just me talking at you, but it's all of us talking together. I'm really excited about that. So again, that's patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. Support the podcast, get some stuff in exchange for it. I've got an exciting several topics for us to cover today. We'll do our 3 points, and then we'll get into our last segment. If you're new, what we do here is we try to take nuanced biblical views of current pressing issues and see if we can walk out our Christian faith in meaningful ways. So without further ado, let's get to today's 3 points. The world was shocked when two teenagers out for a supposed joyride decided not only to start aiming the car at bicyclists on the road, but to live stream the whole thing onto social media. It turned out that one of the now alleged three bicyclists that they hit died and was a retired police chief. And when they were arrested, one of the boys allegedly said, "I'll be out in 30 days anyway." And so everyone was kind of expecting that when they finally got into court, that the reality of the situation would hit them. It came out that they were going to be tried as adults and they were being put up for murder charges. And so surely this was going to sober them, and they were going to come in with the weight of the reality that they could be spending the rest of their lives in prison. And that expectation was far from met when they actually had their day in court. The New York Post says teens accused of killing retired police chief laugh and flip off victim's family in court. There's a video that shows a little bit of this for those who are watching. See if we can get it to play.
These guys, they did not respect the court whatsoever.
The teens appear to communicate with each other, at times covering their faces and also laughing.
Courtroom video shared with KTV shows two Las Vegas teens accused of fatally running over a retired police chief laughing at each other before smiling and seemingly flipping off their victim's family during a court hearing earlier this week. Here is the video of the two young men. We won't say their names. It shows them right before they are about to actually hit one of the bicyclists. We'll go down and read a little bit. Two Las Vegas teens accused of fatally running over a retired police chief laughed at each other, smiled, and seemingly, allegedly, flipped off their victim's family during a court hearing earlier this week. They were back in court on Tuesday, more than 2 months after they allegedly recorded themselves intentionally plowing into Andreas Probst, a 64-year-old retired police chief who was out on a morning bike ride. The teens' antics began when they sat down for the hearing in Clark County Court, covering the right side of their faces to hide themselves from the cameras before appearing to cover their mouths to suppress their laughter. The teens, who were both minors when Probst was killed, were charged with murder and are being tried as adult. Probst's family slammed the teens' appalling actions, saying they really had no remorse. And I think what many people felt when they saw this, when they saw them just laughing, and side note, their attorney at times joining them and also laughing, which unbelievably unprofessional. Wow. So with these two guys, the thought was, how can somebody this young, 16 and 18 years old, become this calloused? Like, how can someone have so much hatred and so much evil in their hearts? And like, how do you get there this quickly and this early in life? And scripture has quite a bit to say to this. Paul had a younger guy he was mentoring named Timothy, and he wrote 2 different letters to Timothy that we have in our scriptures. In 1 Timothy chapter 4, he says, "Now the Spirit explicitly says that in later times, some will depart from the faith, paying attention to deceitful spirits and the teachings of demons." And then it says, "through hypocrisy of liars, whose consciences are seared." And that's very interesting language, whose consciences are seared. Now, searing is like cauterized, like cut off, ultimately hardened, like whatever you imagine our conscious being, it's like separated off from its source of life. It no longer operates correctly. It's been cut off from this spiritual, metaphysical dimension that brings our conviction and guilt and emotions into alignment with the reality of the circumstance. Like, I'm at trial because I murdered someone and this should sit on me and I should be remorseful. We see a seared conscience in these young men. And it says, because they are paying attention to deceitful spirits and the teachings of demons. And we live in a world that has moved to where we are antithetical to Christ in many aspects of our culture. And young men especially are not incentivized towards the things of God. We're not incentivized to self-sacrifice, where we deny ourselves and we take up burdens, we take up our cross, we suffer well for the sake of others. And the ultimate inversion of self-sacrifice, which is the way Jesus created us to live, is the counterfeit that the demonic spirit brings. Jesus creates, Satan counterfeits. And so instead of self-sacrifice, we sacrifice others. And usually that means we will use others. We will use women for our own sexual gratification. We will use friends for our own clout and status. We will use institutions to get out of them what we want without feeling like we have any responsibility to actually add to our community. This is just the ultimate expression of this. For their own social media clout, for their own fun, they literally sacrificed somebody else's life. They ran them over in cold blood, and their conscience is so seared that it doesn't seem to resonate with them or sit on them at all, what they've done. Paul also describes this when he's writing to the Romans. In Romans chapter 1, he says, "For God's wrath is revealed from heaven against all godlessness and unrighteousness of people who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth." He goes on to say, "What can be known about God is evident among them because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, that is his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen since the creation of the world, being understood through what he has made. And as a result, people are without excuse." In other words, God has revealed himself. Now, these young men live in the West, which means they're not fully ignorant to the actual revelation of God through Jesus Christ delivered to us by Scripture. At some level, they're aware of it. It's just a part of the culture. I mean, even in hardcore rap music, there are explicit references often to biblical themes and biblical characters and theological truths. They're aware of it. But even people who don't have the divine revelation of Scripture, Paul is saying the Gentiles of that time who didn't know the God of Judaism, who now came down in Jesus and opened up Christianity, he's saying they are without excuse because God's revealed himself even through the revelation of the world around us. He says, for though they knew God, they did not glorify him as God or show gratitude. Instead, their thinking became worthless and their hearts were darkened. They, claiming to be wise, they became fools. Their thinking became worthless and their hearts became darkened. In other words, they were cauterized, they were seared. Their conscience no longer functioned correctly because they allowed themselves, even at 16, 18 years old, to become so invested by the counterfeit offers that the world tries to pull us into, demonic forces away from God, that they were not able to see the truth and cling to truth. And the truth is what sets us free. And the truth is what brings light and revelation to our heart, and it should be heartbreaking to us. And we see examples of this, like in Genesis 37, it says, they, the brothers of Joseph, saw him in the distance, and before he had reached them, they plotted to kill him. And they said to one another, oh, look, here comes the dream expert. So now come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits, and we can say that a vicious animal ate him, and then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. The brothers of Joseph hated him so much because of the favoritism that his father had shown towards Joseph. And their hearts had become so calloused towards him that they were ready to kill him. And if it wasn't for the oldest brother, Reuben, they would have done it. But instead, he hatches a plan instead to throw him into a pit, and eventually they'll sell him into slavery. And I want to show evidence of just this seared conscience of the brothers when it says in verse 25, they sat down to eat a meal. When Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped off his robe, the long sleeve robe he had on. They took him and threw him into a pit, and the pit was empty and it was without water. And they sat down to eat a meal. That is a seared conscience. Like, you just basically ended your brother's life. You didn't kill him because your oldest brother wouldn't let him, but you've ended his life. And in a few verses, you're going to ship him off to be a slave in Egypt. You have ended and ruined his life. And you just sit down to eat. You just sit down in court and laugh. You walk out of the court and flip off the family. Your conscience is seared. And we see another great hero of the faith who gets to a place where he denies the revelation of God so much that his conscience becomes seared. And that's King David. He has something he wants. He wants Bathsheba. She becomes pregnant. Not only does he commit adultery, he then organizes the murder of her husband. And in Psalm 51, we have the repentance of David and him crying out to God. We have the famous line, create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. And what David understood, same thing that Jesus taught, is our actions come from the inside out. It's from the heart that evil flows, and it's from the heart that goodness flows. And David knew he didn't just need a change of behavior. He didn't just need a change of action. Create in me a pure heart. Renew a steadfast spirit within me. My conscience is seared, and we should be heartbroken by these young men. But at the same time, we need to realize when we suppress the truth of God in any area of our life, our conscience can become seared as well. I don't believe this is an all or nothing. Like, either you are a sociopathic killer who can sit and laugh in court, or you're like, a perfect angel. This can happen in part before it happens in the whole. And the first time that we begin a habit, and there are several habits that are against God's way. There are sexual habits. There are things like pornography that have become just so ubiquitous, especially among men in our world. And you start, and maybe you feel guilt at the beginning, but the more you go, the less you give into the feelings of guilt, and you even satisfy those feelings of guilt with the same toxic behaviors. And eventually your conscience can become seared and your heart can become hardened. And if you have an area like that in your life, and I have had that in my life, you can become so angry at someone that your conscience towards them becomes seared. Even though Jesus has called us to love even our enemies, you can begin to truly hate someone and not even feel conviction about that hate. You can harden your heart from God. And those areas where we find ourselves like that, we have to cry out like David, create in me a pure heart, God. Renew my mind, like Paul says in Romans 12, the transformation of my life from the renewal of my mind and my heart and my spirit start from the inside out. And God can break through a heart of stone and give you back a heart of flesh, like he says in the prophets. He can come inside of you and begin to transform you from the inside out. Andy Beshear is in a gubernatorial race, and he is fighting to once again be the governor of Kentucky. And this decision he made all the way back in 2020 is now coming back to absolutely haunt him. Let's look at the reporting. Majority of Kentucky inmates released by governor's COVID commutations committed felonies. It goes on to say nearly 70% of all inmates released by Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear through commutations during the coronavirus pandemic went on to reoffend, with some committing violent felonies like assault and even homicide.
Wow.
1,700 criminals let out due to the spread of COVID. And this was early 2020. So, we try to have the most nuanced view. No one knew what this was. They were saying like millions or tens of millions of people were going to die from this. We had no idea what to do with it or how serious it was. And it was going through prisons because it's these isolated populations, kind of like it went through nursing homes, these places where people are in close proximity to one another. And they were worried about it. And so the answer was, let's let 1,700 of these people out early. Let's commute their sentences. And so 70% have reoffended. The majority of those are felonies. And there's even at least one homicide. And so here's the first thing to realize. Justice is getting what you deserve and not getting what you do not deserve. Justice is getting what you deserve. And so what we want in our justice system is for the punishment to fit the crime. And all the way back to like the code of Hammurabi, like the one of the very first in the whole ancient world, thousands and thousands of years ago, written down governmental codes, understood the power of deterrence. And what happens when you begin to commute sentences is that just like the two teens who struck and fatally killed the bicyclist on purpose while live streaming it, the first thing they said when they got put in the cop car was, I'll be out in 30 days. We have a soft on crime spreading ideology throughout the West, and people are no longer deterred by the potential punishments. And when you commute 1,700 people at a time, somewhere in the subconscious recesses of your mind, you go, well, even if I do commit another crime, I'll probably get out early. I'm probably not serving my whole time. Let's go back to the reporting. It says the report produced by Kentucky's Department of Information and Technology Service found that of the 1,702 individuals whose sentences were commuted by Beshear in 2020, a majority of them, 882, went on not to jaywalk, not to get a speeding ticket, to commit felonies. An additional 252 committed misdemeanors, leaving just over 500 who committed no crimes. Beshear commuted criminal sentences through two distinct executive orders, both of which were examined in the report. Of those from April 3rd, 2020 release, 68% of individuals have had at least one criminal case, including at least a misdemeanor charge filed against them since release. The reoffending rate was nearly identical for those released on August 24th, 2020, with the report finding that 69% of individuals have had at least one criminal case, including at least a misdemeanor charge filed against them. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see this chart, which shows the two different executive orders, the new felonies that were committed in orange, the new misdemeanors committed in blue, the new other, something that wasn't a misdemeanor or felony, and then this massive minority of people who have not got any new charges. This is obviously a miscarriage of justice. It was a miscalculation on the part of Andy Beshear. And it really shows how we can do things sometimes with the right intentions, but with the improper wisdom, and it can have disastrous effects. Someone lost their life. Others were assaulted. The majority of people released committed, again, felonies, not minor petty felonies. And all the way back to the ancient wisdom, we should have been able to anticipate this exact outcome. Number one, we just know psychologically and sociologically that the recidivism rate is so high. And recently I got to do some prison ministry for the first time. And it was amazing when we asked, how many of you is this not your first time? The majority of the room raised their hand. The majority of people had been in there before, and they were hoping and praying that this would be their last. And the other thing I found interesting with this group that I went in to do prison ministry with is that the likelihood of recidivism drops massively if someone leaves prison and is willing to get into some kind of faith community. And we just know this. And I know a lot of people struggle with the idea of God, and a lot of Christians have presented a God that doesn't represent who God actually is, his nature or his character. And a lot of people have been hurt by organized religion. And a lot of people just have a lot of questions. They're very skeptical, maybe naturally. But what we see over and over again is that change in the most difficult circumstances often requires spiritual intervention. This is like the most successful addiction intervention in the world is the 12 steps. And it necessitates a belief in a higher power and the possibility of actual spiritual change in your life. And the recidivism rates also reflect this, that when there is spiritual change and when there is spiritual community around you, that is your greatest opportunity to get back to living the life that God created you to live. And it does no one any favors to allow them to escape the consequence of their actions. And anytime justice fails to be served, someone somewhere will pay the price that was due. The person that was murdered by one of these released inmates, they paid a massive price. They paid the ultimate price for someone else's lack of justice in their sentence. In Psalm 89:14, it says, righteousness and justice are the foundations of your throne. Steadfast love and faithfulness go before you. I love that justice is put right alongside these other attributes of righteousness, love, and faithfulness. And it's specifically paired with righteousness. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of the throne of God, the foundation of a correct system, the foundation of how things are supposed to function. Justice and righteousness are like the two sides of this foundation that uphold law and order and love and faithfulness. All the way back in the Levitical law, it says, you shall do no injustice in court. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great. But again, in righteousness, you shall judge your neighbor. Again, justice and righteousness. You cannot truly have one without the other. And the problem is Andy Beshear, I think, was trying to do something right, something even potentially righteous in that situation. But you cannot be righteous if you are not upholding justice. And we should remember that even in our own lives. Katie and I recently watched the Netflix docuseries Quarterback, which followed the whole seasons from 2022 and 2023 of Patrick Mahomes and Marcus Mariota and Kirk Cousins. And it really is a great series. Just be warned, if you're going to watch this around your kids, there is a lot of language. That's really the only thing. There's, 1.5 million F words and a lot of other words. Almost all of them, somewhat surprisingly to me, I don't know why I was surprised, but almost all of them from Patrick Mahomes. That did surprise me. Maybe it shouldn't have, but you have Marcus Mariota, who I didn't know a whole lot about. I remembered when he won the Heisman. He's been kind of a journeyman. He's been with a lot of different teams. I won't spoil the series, but he ended up being the starter for Atlanta. And he has the least notable season out of all of them, other than some drama he found himself in. Then you have Patrick Mahomes, who, Netflix hit the lottery. They hit the jackpot because they decided to follow him for the 2022-2023 seasons with no promises of what was going to happen. And he ends up winning the Super Bowl that year. So they get to follow this docuseries all the way through his Super Bowl win. And Patrick Mahomes is probably the most talented player in the NFL today. And I think most people would agree, already one of the greatest NFL players of all time. He is so young to be so successful, to have MVPs and multiple Super Bowl wins and Super Bowl MVPs. He plays like no one else has really played before. You got a little bit of Brett Favre, a little bit of Aaron Rodgers, but he can also just sit in the pocket. He can just do things, and you really see the work that goes into there. He's so intense, and he's so hyper, and he's so focused, and he's ultimately successful. And then you have Kirk Cousins. And Kirk Cousins has been someone who has gotten a lot of animosity, who a lot of people feel like he hasn't really lived up to his potential in the NFL. And he has this wonderful season. This isn't like a spoiler. This happened last football season, but that ends in crushing defeat. But the winner of the docuseries is Kirk Cousins. The winner of the docuseries is clearly Kirk Cousins and the Cousins family. He came out of that as not just the most loved man in the NFL, but honestly, one of the most endearing human beings who has ever walked planet Earth. I mean, people could not really put their finger on it, but it's like, this is the best human being. USA Today tried to take some guesses at exactly why he just came off so endearing. And part of their article, Kirk Cousins becomes relatable to football fans. It may be easier for viewers to relate to Cousins as a person more than a football player. For one, Cousins routinely wears the modest clothes that his wife Julie lays out for him. After the playoff loss, Cousins greeted his son in the bathroom as one of them took a bath before bed. He reads a book to one of them, then put him to sleep with a song and a prayer. During the Vikings' thrilling 39-36 win over the Indianapolis Colts, where Minnesota completed the largest comeback in NFL history after being down 33-0 at halftime, Cousins wanted his son Cooper to join him in the locker room after the game. Cooper was more excited about eating strawberries and a cookie at his dad's locker. Cousins also shared his Tuesday routine during the NFL season, in which he takes his sons to preschool, spends quality time with his wife, and even does some shopping for new books at Barnes & Noble. Cousins also takes some time to read and respond to letters from fans during the off day, an endearing moment during the series. He says, people who cheer us on, pray for us, and are asking for something. I think it's worth it to brighten their day with an autograph or a notebook. Cousins wrote to one fan, "Don't hold it against your teacher. She's a Packers fan. We all have our faults." And what USA Today is trying to do is just put their finger on why we love this guy so freaking much. This guy is the best. And they're just taking a lot of guesses. Now, if you follow the NFL, you know that this weekend, Kirk Cousins actually got hurt with a season-ending Achilles tear. And I thought this tweet also, once again, trying to put our finger on it, the most loved player in football while being carted off the field, Vikings quarterback Kirk Cousins started clapping for his teammates, encouraging them. He was most likely in excruciating pain, but he made sure to be there for his teammates. This is why Kirk is the most loved player in the league, even if he does not play for your team. And here's video of him being put onto the cart, unable to walk, a torn Achilles. His season is over. His career may even be in question, especially his career with the Vikings. And then you'll notice he looks up towards the Jumbotron and sees his team make a great play. And while this could just be all about him, he starts clapping and cheering for his team. So maybe this is it. Are these the reasons? Do we love Kirk Cousins because he wears flannel shirts that look like you could buy them in bulk at Costco? No! Do we love Kirk Cousins because he takes all the fan mail and responds like to everyone and sends them an autograph? No! Do we even love Kirk Cousins because when he's hurt, and we saw Mahomes get hurt in the quarterback series, and he's cussing out his coach and he's throwing crap everywhere. And instead, or in contrast, Kirk Cousins takes the time to not think about himself and to cheer for his team after a season-ending injury. Is that exactly and precisely why we love Kirk Cousins? No! Then why is it? What is it about this guy? What is this magnetism that draws us all in and makes us all love this guy and want to hang out with this guy and want, you and your spouse to be couple friends with the Cousins and like watch them as they raise their kids so that we can learn from them? What is it that makes this guy so fascinating? Whether they know it or not, people are seeing Jesus through Kirk Cousins' life. Whether they know it or not, people are seeing Jesus through Kirk Cousins' life. And when Jesus was on earth, what you saw was a magnetism. People from every walk of life were just drawn to him. If you'll notice in scripture, even his enemies Even the Pharisees and the scribes and the Sadducees, they couldn't help themselves. They kept showing up and they were like, you know what? We really hate this guy.
Stop the cap.
And they did. They end up killing him. But Nicodemus, a Pharisee, he comes to Jesus at night in the cloak of darkness so that nobody knows that he's there because he just needs to know. He's so curious. This guy's life is so different. And this is the way the gospel actually spreads. And this is the way that people start considering that Christianity might have something to offer their life outside of all of the religious drama and all of the religious pain that so many people have felt inside of organized religion. In Matthew 5, Jesus said, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Paul said to the Corinthians, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, if you throw a football, do it all for the glory of God. And some people think that the job of a Christian is to carry around a 19.5-pound King James Bible and just slap people over the head with it until they finally submit to your form of Christianity. And that's just,
Stop the cap.
That cannot be what we're actually called to do. We're called to let our light shine, to let our example shine. You know, Paul is reminding the Ephesians that they aren't saved at all by their works, for by grace you're saved through faith, not by works. It is a gift of God. And he says, not from works, so that no one can boast about it. And we stop there and we forget the next verse says, and you are God's masterpiece, created for good works, not to get ourselves to heaven, but to bring the light of heaven to the world around us. And when you can really live out your faith like that, man, you become the most powerful example. And people begin to see Jesus in you. And people begin to write articles like, why do we like this guy so much? I mean, here's what's crazy. There's this clip I'm about to show, and it's right after the devastating loss. And Vikings fans, it's clear in the docuseries, they believed they would win the Super Bowl that year. They had like 8 or 10 games where they had fourth quarter comebacks. It just felt like in every situation, they always pulled out the win. They were down in one game, 33-0 at halftime. They had the biggest comeback in NFL history. It just felt like a season of good fortune. And Kirk Cousins, if it wouldn't have been for Patrick Mahomes, might have been the MVP of the entire league. He was playing out of his mind. And it all came down in a fiery heap when they lose in the first round of the playoffs. It's devastating. Everything he's worked hard for. And you watch him, he's severely injured for the last half of the season. He's hurt and hurting every game, all of that work and everything you watch him go through. And it just all falls apart. And here is the night that he loses that game.
It's kind of a cruel reality of this business, but you know, it hurt to walk off of our field in front of our fans after the season we had and not win that game. Yeah, it hurts. It hurts. I'm probably missing one, but this is probably the toughest loss I've had in my career. So it hurts. The plays that you go back and beat yourself up over is just misery. There weren't a ton, but there were probably 3. And you feel like if you just have those 3 back, you might win the game. It's usually about this time when you start feeling all the pains from the game. You're just walking around your house and you're like, ooh, that hurts. You comfy?
Just putting this kid to bed.
Because you didn't get a great nap and it's 9 o'clock. All righty. Ready to sing and pray? On Christ the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. Jesus, thanks for today. Thanks for protecting Dad in his football game and through this football season. And thanks for Mommy and for Turner, for the great family we have. And God, we continue to just give the days ahead to you and trust you for what's up ahead. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
That simple. Coming home from a crushing defeat where most people would just want to be alone, where no one would blame him if he said to his wife, if you can just put the kids to bed, I just need some space. I just need to think this through. No one would think he's a bad guy. As a matter of fact, we would just think he's normal. But somehow in the docuseries, and maybe this is just for me, but for me, It was more compelling to watch Kirk Cousins lose than to watch Patrick Mahomes win the Super Bowl. It was more compelling to see what Christ creates in Kirk Cousins' life in defeat than to watch the absolute glories of going to the Super Bowl and doing all of the press and going through all the hoopla and pulling off a come from behind win. That was cool and it was inspiring. But I mean, this moved me emotionally to watch Kirk Cousins end his night singing to his kids, and not to his kids, singing with his kids to the Lord and just praying and cementing his trust. Peter wrote in the New Testament and said, "To this you were called, because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps." Here's the powerful truth of allowing the world to see Christ in you, is that you can have as much or even more influence with those around you. You can be even more compelling and magnetic to those around you through loss and suffering than without Christ you could be with the absolute height of success. And now let's get to our last section. I want to remind you that I have a Patreon for the Clayton Tyner podcast. It is www.patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. That's patreon.com/Clayton, Tyner. Check it out at the link in the description below. You can help support this podcast, cover the cost of what it's taking to actually run the podcast week to week, and help it build as we continue to grow. And in exchange, you can get access to exclusive content, early access to some videos. You can even be a part of monthly live Q&As where instead of me just talking to you through a screen, we all jump into a video call together and get to interact with each other. So again, that's patreon.com/Clayton Tyner. For our last section, we are going to look at famous YouTubers Rhett and Link. Now, Rhett and Link, kind of their story is we were never expressly Christian YouTubers, which was actually shocking for me to hear because that's all I knew them as. Like in the Christian community, we all knew. And I guess before they started their YouTube journey, they were actually professional missionaries. And they talk about growing up very fundamentally. Now they have grown or they have joined a growing list of people who have deconstructed their faith. Now, there are thousands, or at this point, probably millions, or I don't know, tens of millions of people who have privately deconstructed their faith, which is a term that just means questioning the aspects of the tenets of whatever faith they hold. And usually it implies that they then walk away from their faith. They deconstruct it. And then some people may reconstruct it into something that honestly I think can be very helpful. My own story, I think, is a story of deconstruction. I just did the next step of reconstruction. I became very skeptical about all of the things that I believed because I believed them because that's what my parents believed. And I began to question everything. And I began to search as far and as wide as I could. And I became even more convinced of the claims of Christianity and specifically the claims of Jesus, and eventually reconstructed my faith into something that I think actually resonates more with who God is and his nature and character revealed in scripture, and who Jesus has called us to be as individuals. And really in the deconstruction, all the stuff that didn't get put back in was just all of the religious nonsense and all of the unnecessary traditions. And there are some necessary traditions. I'm not just crapping on tradition, but all of the things that had been put there primarily by people who were trying to control other people. And that's just simply not the movement that Jesus started. So these deconstructionists, to be transparent, are often quite frustrating to me because when you hear their stories of deconstruction, it feels like they have created a narrative around their deconstruction to obfuscate or to hide the actual point or purpose of it. And so this was on Howie Mandel's podcast, and it's a much longer conversation that you can go seek out for yourself to make sure you feel like I did a good job pulling out the clips and representing their arguments well. But I want to play a few clips from this, and I took some time to try and get to the heart of their arguments the best I could without showing the whole hour-long podcast, and then respond to them in time and ultimately tie it up with some big conclusive thoughts that I think get to the heart of their deconstruction without having to go through all of the barriers built around it. But we'll look at the barriers as well. So this is Rhett and Link.
I mean, he kind of spearheaded this, the questions and the quest of, okay, I'm not satisfied with some answers I'm getting. I was his sounding board for his spiritual deconstruction. And so I think that I was, just kind of along for the ride.
So that's Link talking, and Rhett is the one with much longer hair. And this is the saddest admission from the whole interview. Is Link is saying, I was kind of just a passenger on this. Rhett was asking the big questions and digging deep, and I was kind of a sounding board, but in his own words, I was just kind of along for the ride. And this isn't like, my buddy really wanted to visit Canada, and I was ambivalent, but, I jumped in and I was along for the ride. This is like your eternal life and the core of your worldview and how you're going to function in society and what the heart of your purpose for being a human being is. And you're like, I'm just kind of along for the ride.
Wow.
All right, let's keep going.
Honestly, because my brain doesn't work in the same way. I was much more comfortable because I thought it was working for me. I thought that how I conducted my faith was more helpful than harmful. Actually, now I've started to realize over the past decade that there were a lot of things that were healthy for me to shed in terms of judgment and shame and how I processed that. But as a sounding board, I was pretty much just kind of like a step or two behind him in terms of my evolving beliefs.
My other concern for Link is he says now, which if you know their journey is like, now that I've walked away from the faith, now that I no longer call myself a Christian, now I'm realizing how helpful this is. The problem with that is it doesn't necessarily mean he's just rationalizing the decision that he's made. But he has put himself in a scenario where that's highly likely. You have quite a bit of sunk costs once you make a big decision, like I'm leaving Christianity, even though I am known as a Christian influencer. And so once you've made a massive decision like this, for a counterexample, when someone leaves their family, they leave their spouse and kids, they now are in a position where they have massive sunk costs. Like they have sunk their whole life into this decision they've made. And they're forced now to rationalize why this was a good decision for them. And now we're going to hear from Rhett, who was kind of the brains behind this deconstruction.
Because as we said, you're the questioning personally, the decision to make a change in a direction of thought and how you operate your life is a real personal thing. That could have been a huge wedge and maybe the end of this partnership.
Well, and it started with the first person I kind of confided in was my wife, and I've seen this so many times. It's very unusual for a married couple that are both in a particular faith and one person says adios. Most of the time, those end in divorce.
Right.
The first time I told her, listen, we didn't believe that evolution happened. We believed that Adam and Eve were real. We believed that what is in the book of Genesis was like history. And so
was there a moment where this came, where you had a flash and you went, wait?
It was like I started reading about this in my early 20s, but mostly what I would do is I would go and I would be like, hey, there's all these people saying that the earth is, 10,000 years old, but like every time I go to a museum, they're like, this thing lived millions of years ago.
Wow.
Never looked into this, but I started reading about it. And actually I started reading from I would go to Christian sources, right? And there's a lot of Christians who don't believe that. There's a lot of Christians who believe in evolution, right? There's a lot of Christians who believe that the world is old or whatever and kind of accept established science. And so I would slowly read these sources and kind of my view was changing. But then when it was like, I don't know how to reconcile this particular thing about, well, if we have this common ancestor with chimpanzees and apes and Adam and Eve, how do you explain that? I would start asking these questions, and then I would go to my pastor, go to these other people. I would ask them questions, and I didn't get satisfactory answers. And then it just was like a house of cards that was slowly falling until
a house of cards that was slowly falling. Now, if you're listening to this and you have you're a believer and you have any form of apologetics background, then you're maybe confused by Rhett's answer here, because he says, well, how he asks, okay, what was it? Like, what was the final straw? And you're not really going to get that answer directly, although I think in one of the clips we're going to look at, we do get that answer. What is the actual core of this deconstruction, and what decided how they went down this path and what their objectives were? But he's trying to build, this is the obfuscation is, there were just so many unanswered questions. And, I mean, we actually believed in Adam and Eve, silly us, silly fundamentalist Christians. And we thought the world was 6,000 years old. And then he starts talking, and he's got to admit, now, there are like a lot of Christians who believe that the earth is much older than 6,000 years old, and who have like really in-depth scientific theories about how Genesis is actually probably the most accurate account of what could have happened, including the science that we now know. And there are even Christians who believe in full-on evolution. So it's like the thing I'm saying is like the core, like the snowflake that started the snowball that ultimately created the avalanche that took out my faith or whatever. There are answers to it. And the reason is he's saying it's this house of cards and everything, is this isn't what actually triggered it. And Link, the poor guy, is just kind of being walked along this path to completely leave the core of his faith. In Ephesians 4, Paul writes and says, and he himself gave some to be apostles and some prophets and some evangelists and some pastors and some teachers to equip the saints for the work of ministry and to build up the body of Christ until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of God's Son, growing into maturity with a stature measured by Christ's fullness. Then, here's what he says, then if you do this, if you build yourself up, if you actually are learned in your faith, if you know how to handle the scriptures, then we will no longer be little children tossed by the waves and blown around by every wind of teaching, by human cunning with cleverness in the techniques of deceit. Then we will no longer just be along for the ride. Then we will no longer be making excuses by trying to compete scientific books against scriptural books and coming to the conclusion that we probably want to come to in the first place. And this push, when they keep talking about over and over, and it's a longer interview, how they were in deep fundamental Christian circles, and I don't know how well they were equipped. I don't know how seriously they took studying to show themselves approved. I don't know those things about them, and I believe that their faith was genuine at one point and that they started this journey for really good reasons. But as we'll see, I think there's the true core of what happened to pull them out of this season and ultimately for them to walk away from their faith. Let's look at the next clip.
Put me over the edge was inclusivity versus exclusivity and judgment and inclusion. Like I really wanted, like I was a loving, inclusive person that wasn't excluding somebody based on their any type of orientation,
Right. And was that, which is a dichotomy toward the teachings of
Exactly. Like we have all, we have all these fans who come from all walks of life, all different perspectives. Yeah, some people who are conservative Christian people, but a lot of people who are not. And I think that our philosophy of inclusivity and of accepting people and encouraging people to accept themselves versus encouraging them to adhere to sort of a Stone Age moral philosophy, that is something that philosophy has been incredibly harmful to a lot of people and to a lot of people who call themselves mythical beasts, our fans.
Right.
So I think we were like, well, listen, first of all, we don't want you guys to think that we stand with that. That's not who we are.
Right. That's what put me over the edge was I didn't want to alienate and be presumed to be judging fans that I cared about and that I was connecting with and that I was hearing their stories and my heart was going out to them. And so I didn't want them to think the exact opposite of what I felt about them as people. So I got more interested in sharing my truth, I guess you would call it.
No, but
There's so much in this one clip, including that it ends with Link saying that he traded the truth for my truth. They say we had so many fans, and they did. Rhett and Link, they I don't know how they did it. They hacked the YouTube algorithm. They were early adopters on the platform. They have not slowed down. They are massive. And they say this very interesting phrase, this Stone Age philosophy. And the Stone Age philosophy is one where you do not accept people. It's one where you discriminate against people. It's one where there's massive division. And I agree with that. And what changed that Stone Age philosophy was Jesus and the Gospels. And so, yes, they're pointing out an important problem, but what they have done is they have thrown out the solution to that problem. There's this amazing passage that Paul writes to the Colossians in Colossians chapter 3. It says, "So if you've been raised with Christ, seek the things above where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on earthly things. For you died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. And when Christ, who is your life, appears, then you will also appear with him in glory. Therefore, put to death what belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil, desire, and greed, which is idolatry. Because of these, God's wrath is coming upon the disobedient. And you once walked in these things when you were living in them, but now put away all the following: anger, wrath, malice, slander, filthy language from your mouth. Do not lie to one another, since you have put off the old self with its practices, and have put on the new self. You're being renewed in knowledge according to the image of your Creator. In Christ, there is not Greek or Jew, circumcision and uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, slave and free, but Christ is all and in all." So he's saying there's all of these things that the world practices. And when Rhett and Link say, we don't want to be divisive, we want to be accepting, I have this philosophy of acceptance, I wonder how far that actually goes. Does he accept people into their community who are vile, who are slanderers, who slander them or slander their friends? Do they accept people who are evil? Do they accept murderers? Do they accept people who prey on children? Do they really, how far does the acceptance go? And what they're doing is they are setting a complete false dichotomy between love and acceptance. If you can't love someone who you have actual real differences with, then you don't know what love is. Real, meaningful differences are not the proof that love does not exist. They are the test of whether love is genuine in the first place. And so they're saying, if I can't fully accept people and just exactly as they are, then I can't really love them. And that is a counterfeit truth. And that's not the truth of Scripture. That's Link's truth. And so Link has a truth that's like 40 years in the making. The ancient wisdom of Scripture has a transcendent grounding back into eternity past. God, who is all and is in all. And I want to show you, because Paul to the Colossians just talked about all of these things and how the wrath of God will come against all of this disobedience. But then how does he actually tell the Christians to live? He says, therefore, as God's chosen ones, holy and dearly loved, put on what? Compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, bearing with one another, forgiving one another if anyone has a grievance against another. Just as the Lord has forgiven you, you're also to forgive. And above all, above everything else, put on love, which is the perfect bond of unity. And let the peace of Christ, to which you were called in one body, rule your hearts, and be thankful. And let the word of Christ dwell richly among you in all wisdom and teaching, admonishing one another through psalms, hymns, spiritual songs, singing to God with gratitude in your heart. And whatever you do, in word or in deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. We are called primarily to love. And even the things that would make someone an enemy to you, Jesus obviously calls us to love. And, you know, Rhett talked about how the hardest part was he had to tell his wife, hey, I'm leaving the faith. And she cried when he didn't believe in evolution anymore. And so Stone Age philosophy was, if your wife burns the bread, divorce her, kill her. I mean, that's the Stone Age philosophy that Jesus and Jesus' movement completely inverted. Jesus created a new path, and Rhett and Link, whether they know it or not, with their desire to love people, with their desire to do good in the world, with their desire to bring diverse people together, that's new. What has been throughout all human history is division among every line imaginable. Age, race, ethnicity, gender, social status. They hate that. They want inclusion, bring everyone together. That's Jesus. Jesus did that. And one of the problems with these deconstructors that I see as a theme is they have an incredibly narrow epistemological framework. They don't think about the world past maybe 1940 in World War II, or maybe the 20s and 30s in the Great Depression, or maybe World War I, or they know something happened in 1776 and 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. They don't have an understanding of how the world worked and how human history played out before the gospel infiltrated places. And so Rhett and Link are standing on the foundation that Jesus and the gospel built, condemning Jesus and the gospel. Let's look at one more clip.
Well, and listen, let me tell you, on this side of it, it's a lot better. As someone who lived within the confines of that system, and someone who is more just a humanitarian, a humanist at this point.
Yeah, it's easier because I mean there were years of I have to find a way to love gay people, but not really
accept them or their partner or whatever. But more so than that, for me, I had, because, if you're a Christian, and especially if you're an evangelical Christian, the mandate is the Great Commission. Jesus telling people to go and share the gospel, right? You're supposed to bring people into the fold. What that does is it sets up this dynamic with every single interaction that you have with a person. There's a burden that you need to tell them this thing. And that the dynamic in your mind is that I have a truth. I possess the right answers. I possess the truth. And there needs to be an exchange of right truth to them that they don't have it. That dynamic is toxic. It is debilitating. It changes every interaction that you have with somebody. I enjoy living life so much more now, where I get to talk to somebody and I'm like, well, what am I going to learn from this person? Not what can I teach this person? How can I tell this person that what I believe is right? Well, it's like, well, let's see here's another person with another specific experience from a different place in the world. They've got a certain perspective. I have a lot more personal satisfaction out of getting their perspective and being like, well, how does that impact my perspective? Versus carrying around this book of truth that you have to shove down people's throats in every opportunity that you get. Even if you're doing it in love, it's the dynamic is that you're right and they're wrong and that you got to settle it.
Jesus said, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Rhett and Link both say, it's so much easier now. I'm just a humanist now. And I just love, man, the more diverse the person is, the better. And I just want to learn from them. And if they could actually get what they're asking for, the removal of Jesus and his gospel from the world, they would realize life is not easier. Someone with diverse opinion, diverse life experience, diverse ethnicity, diverse worldview, they would be hunting you. You would be an other. You would be outside of the tribe. And tribes did not come together and hold hands and say, what can we learn from each other today? They killed each other. They shed each other's blood. Jesus comes and says, there is now no Jew or Greek, slave or free, male and female. And those words ring as unique throughout the entire experience of human history. Jesus says, love one another, put others before yourself, treat others as more important than you are. Jesus says, be humble in a world where humility was a vice and not a virtue. I think at the end of this, there's a reason that so many Christian influencers are deconstructing their faith. Here's what Jesus says. Now, great crowds were traveling with him, so he turned and said to them, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. Now, this is one that when I heard as a kid, I was like, what does that mean? And in this ancient context, often this phrase hate did not mean you actually have to hate your mother. Obviously, Jesus taught us to love everyone, even our enemies. What it means is a contrasting statement. Like if your love and commitment to following Jesus is not so great that everything in comparison is closer to hate than love, then you're not ready to take this on. And he describes what it means. For which of you wanting to build a tower doesn't first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, after he has laid the foundation and cannot finish it, All the onlookers will begin to ridicule, saying, this man started to build and wasn't able to finish. Or what king, going to war against another, will not first sit down and decide if he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one coming against him with 20,000? If not, while the other is still far off, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace. In the same way, therefore, every one of you who does not renounce all his possessions cannot be my disciple. Now, salt is good, but if salt should lose its taste, how will it be made salty? It isn't for the soil or for the manure pile. They throw it out. Let anyone who has ears listen. I think that what these Christian influencers do is they come in and they grow. And remember what Rhett and Link said. All of a sudden, we had so many fans. And how can we not accept them exactly as they are? They believe in this false dichotomy where somehow that wouldn't be loving, instead of the fact that real differences among people prove if you actually love each other. If the only way you can love someone is if you agree with everything, that's the shallowest form of love in the world. All of a sudden, we have so many fans. In other words, had they never had so many fans, they might still have their faith. I think part of the problem is we don't count the cost. And Jesus makes it clear to follow me, deny yourself every day. Pick up your cross, be willing to suffer, be willing to lose fans, be willing to have a smaller channel, be willing to lose worldly influence. I think deconstruction often happens when Christian, following Christ, and influencer, popularity in the world, come into conflict for Christian influencers. They start a war they cannot finish, and so they make peace with the world instead of continuing to fight for Jesus. This has been episode 37 of the Clayton Tyner podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. I am so happy with our growth over the last couple of weeks. It's because of you. Share this podcast with someone who you think would find it interesting. You can go to patreon.com/Clayton Tyner and sign up. You can get exclusive perks if you help support the podcast. I'm just trying to cover some of my costs of what it's taking to put this podcast on. So I appreciate everyone who joins the Patreon. And I hope that the bonus content, the live Q&As, I hope all of that is really meaningful to you as well. You can follow me online at Clayton Tyner. That's Tyner. I love you guys, and I'll see you on episode 38.